It was the last party of the summer, and probably the last time we'd all be together before life scattered us in different directions. College was starting for some, work for others. For me, it was a mixture of both. We all thought it'd be the perfect night to blow off steam one last time, and Brian offered up his uncle's vacation home just outside of town, a big old farmhouse tucked into a stretch of woods. The kind of place that was quiet in a way you only notice once all the noise is gone. There were maybe 20 of us there at the start, friends from school, a few friends of friends, and the usual hangers-on. Brian's uncle had warned him not to use the place, claiming he hadn't been up there in months and the property had weird vibes. We laughed it off, of course. Every old house has a story. That's half the charm. By 2 a.m., the party had died down. The music was low, the fire pit was glowing dim, and the remaining guests were scattered across couches, floor cushions, or already asleep in one of the many spare bedrooms. Brian, Lena, me, and two others, Chris and Jenna, were still up, drinking the dregs of the beer and talking about nothing. I swear to God, the hallway upstairs creeps me out, Jenna said, half laughing. I went to use the bathroom earlier and thought I saw someone standing near the end. You sure it wasn't your reflection in a mirror? I asked, but she shook her head quickly. No, it wasn't even a person exactly. Just a shape, you know what I mean? Like a dark space that didn't belong. Brian chuckled and leaned back in the old recliner. My uncle says the place is haunted. Told me not to stay past midnight, but he's also a guy who believes birds are government drones. Still, there was something in Jenna's voice that made me pause. The firelight flickered across her face, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I'll check it out, Chris offered. He was always the bold one, or the drunkest. He stood up and stretched. Probably just a coat hanging off a door or something. No, Jenna said, almost sharply. Don't. It's fine. But Chris was already walking inside. We waited, half expecting him to scream and jump out to scare us. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Brian groaned and got up. If he's trying to scare us, he's going to find himself locked in the attic. We all followed, though Jenna hung back near the patio door. Inside, the house was dim and smelled faintly of wood polish and something older, like dust trapped in time. The hallway in question stretched from the main stairwell toward a few guest rooms. It was narrow and unlit, the old floorboards groaning under our steps. Chris? Brian called out. No answer. We checked each room. All were empty, except one. At the end of the hall, the door to the last guest room was half open. Brian pushed it fully open and the door moaned on its hinges. Chris was sitting in the middle of the room, facing the far wall. Dude? Brian said cautiously. Chris didn't respond. I stepped closer, uneasy. His back was rigid, hands resting on his knees. I moved around to see his face, and something inside me dropped. He was pale, eyes wide open and glassy. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. Chris, I whispered. He blinked slowly, finally seeming to realize we were there. It's in the wall, he muttered. Behind the wall. It's watching. What is? I don't know, he said, voice low. It wasn't there before, but now it is. We got him to stand, though he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something to lunge at him. He barely spoke the rest of the night. That should have been enough to send us all packing, but we were drunk, tired, and convinced it was just too much weed or a bad reaction to the booze. Jenna, however, was clearly rattled. She kept glancing at the hallway and refused to go back inside after we all returned to the fire pit. About 20 minutes later, Chris said he was going to lie down. Brian offered him the spare room downstairs, but Chris said he wanted to be alone and went to the front of the house instead. I watched him walk off, shoulders hunched. Maybe we should leave tomorrow morning, I suggested. Yeah, Lena said. Something's off tonight. Brian was quiet for a moment. Let's just all crash in the living room. Lights on. No wandering off. No one argued. We moved back inside, locked the doors, and laid out blankets and sleeping bags on the floor. Lena fell asleep quickly. Brian stayed up scrolling through his phone. Jenna didn't sleep at all, just sat in the corner with her knees to her chest. I dozed off sometime around 4 a.m. I woke up to screaming. It was high-pitched, sharp, and coming from the front of the house. Everyone jolted awake. Brian grabbed a flashlight, and we sprinted to the hallway. It was Chris. He was in the foyer, slamming his fists against the front door, screaming to be let out. His eyes were wild, unfocused. It's coming! It's coming! Open the door. Brian fumbled with the lock, but the knob wouldn't budge. It's stuck, he shouted. I tried too. Nothing. The door felt frozen, like something was holding it shut from the other side. Chris backed away suddenly and turned to us. It's behind you, he whispered. We turned, but nothing was there. When we looked back, Chris was gone. Vanished. We found no sign of him. Not in the kitchen, not upstairs, not outside. It was like he had disappeared into the air. Brian even smashed a window trying to get out, only to find that it wouldn't break, like the glass was shatterproof. Jenna started crying. Lena refused to move from the center of the room. We ended up staying in a tight circle, not sleeping, just watching the shadows stretch across the walls until the first light of morning crept in. The door finally opened around 6 a.m., just clicked open like it had never been locked. We stepped outside, one by one, numb and silent. The house behind us looked normal, too normal. We called the cops, of course. Filed a report, search parties were organized. They never found Chris. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Brian. He said he'd gone back to the house with his uncle to pack up some old stuff. While they were there, they heard something upstairs, a soft humming sound. Brian followed it to the same room Chris had been in. He said the wall had changed, like something had pushed out from inside it. A shape the size of a person, pressed out as if trying to escape. Brian left and never went back. I still see Chris in my dreams, standing in that hallway, mouth moving, but I can't hear the words. Behind him, the wall pulses, like something inside is breathing. I haven't been to another house party since. Story the end. It was supposed to be one last party before we all went our separate ways. College was done. 4 years behind us, degrees in hand, plans in place. Some of us were moving to new cities for jobs, others going back home, a couple taking time off to travel. But that weekend in early June, it felt like none of it mattered yet. We just wanted one more wild night in that rickety old house we'd shared since sophomore year. The house was on the edge of campus, a 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and too much space for 5 college kids. The rent was cheap because it was ancient and drafty, with warped floorboards and plumbing that groaned at night. But we loved it. That place had character. We used to joke that it was haunted, like every old house is, because the lights flickered sometimes and weird creaks echoed through the walls. But none of us ever took it seriously. The final party was my idea. I told everyone, invite whoever you want, let's blow off steam and say goodbye, right? By 10 p.m., the house was packed, bodies dancing in the living room, red Solo cups everywhere, bass thumping through the floors. People spilled out onto the porch, smoking or laughing too loud. It was hot and humid, and the whole place felt alive with energy. I floated from room to room, tipsy but in control, hugging people I knew I might not see again for years. Everyone seemed in good spirits. It was one of those nights that feels golden as it's happening, like you're soaking in a memory you'll always go back to. Around 2:30 a.m., things started winding down. People began filing out. A few stayed behind, some friends too drunk to drive, others who just wanted to crash on the couches. I started cleaning up a bit. There was broken glass in the hallway. Someone had dropped a bowl of chips on the stairs, and one of the bedroom doors was hanging slightly open, even though I was sure it had been locked. That was the first thing that gave me pause. It was the spare room on the second floor, the one we never really used. It had been empty all year. We mostly used it for storage. Sometimes a guest would sleep there, but it always had a weird vibe. Cold, even in the summer. The lock on the door was old-fashioned, with one of those skeleton keys, and we all joked that the room gave us the creeps. But tonight, it was open. I pushed the door wider, expecting to see someone passed out inside. But the room was empty, completely dark. I stepped in, my shoes crunching over something on the floor. When I turned on the light, I saw a small framed photo lying face down. I picked it up. It was of the 5 of us from last fall, taken in front of the house. But it hadn't been in this room before. It used to be on the fridge. I walked back downstairs, a little uneasy now. The house had quieted to a low murmur of voices and occasional laughter. People were still stretched out in corners, chatting, finishing beers. I found Casey, my roommate, and told him about the photo. He just shrugged. Someone probably moved it during the party. I nodded, but something didn't sit right. Around 3:15 a.m., the house started to feel off. The air felt heavier, like it had settled. People were mostly asleep or passed out now. Casey had gone to bed. I sat on the porch alone for a while, listening to the night sounds, crickets, the occasional car in the distance. But there was something else too. A sound coming from inside, something like water dripping. I went back in and followed the noise. It led me to the bathroom on the second floor. The faucet was on, not dripping, running full blast into the sink. I turned it off and backed out, uneasy. Then I noticed something on the mirror. At first I thought it was condensation, but it was too hot in the house for that. It was a handprint, a small, narrow handprint smeared down the glass like someone had dragged their fingers through something wet and grimy. I wiped it away with a towel and left. It was almost 4 a.m. when I heard the first scream. It came from the living room. I rushed down and found one of our friends, Vanessa, standing over her boyfriend, Evan, who was sitting upright on the couch, white as a sheet. "She was standing over me," he said, shaking. "I thought it was you," he said to Vanessa. She leaned down right into my face, but she was soaking wet. Her hair was matted. She had no eyes. No one laughed. No one said he was too drunk, because we all knew the story, the one we never talked about. The rumor about the house. Back in the 1980s, a girl named Melody had died here, drowned in the bathtub upstairs. Her boyfriend had supposedly locked her in the bathroom during a fight. He was high, out of his mind. He passed out and she never got out. The story went that she'd scratched at the door until her nails tore, until she was hoarse from screaming. No one came. The door was found locked from the inside. She was dead when they broke it down. Of course, we'd all heard the tale freshman year. Campus urban legends. There were dozens. But the detail about her being soaking wet, hair matted, eyeless, that hadn't come from Evan. That's how the story had always described her. We were all quiet now. No one wanted to go back to sleep. We sat in the kitchen together, lights on, even the ones we didn't need. I think we all were afraid to be alone. Vanessa made coffee, trying to shake it off, but we couldn't. Every sound in the house made us jump. Just before sunrise, the hallway light went out. Not flickered, just died. And then we heard the footsteps upstairs. Not heavy ones, soft, barefoot, like someone walking just slowly enough for you to notice. They came down the hall, reached the top of the stairs, and stopped. None of us moved. Casey whispered, "There's someone up there." I stood, heart hammering in my chest. I picked up the broom, leaning against the counter, pathetic, I know, and started slowly up the stairs. Every creak under my foot felt impossibly loud. At the top of the stairs, everything was still. The hallway was empty. The doors were closed, except for the spare room. The door was open again. Inside, the temperature dropped so fast it hit me like walking into a freezer. I stepped inside and saw that the photo I had picked up earlier was back on the floor, cracked down the center. And there in the far corner of the room was a puddle. Just water. Still and dark and spreading toward me. I stepped back, heart in my throat. That's when I heard the laugh, soft, gurgling, like it came from a throat filled with water. I turned and saw her, Melody, standing just inside the closet, dripping, her long black hair plastered to her pale face. She had no eyes, just dark, sunken pits, and her mouth hung open, stretched impossibly wide, as if gasping for air that would never come. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. She took one step toward me, and I ran. I don't remember hitting the stairs or how I made it outside. I only remember the cold, wet handprint she left on the front of my shirt. The sun came up, and we all left. Left the house, left our things. Some didn't even go back to get their stuff. We broke the lease. The landlord wasn't surprised, said we were the third group in 5 years to do that. I moved back home for a while, tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that sleep deprivation or fear had gotten the best of me. But then, a few weeks later, I got a text from Casey. It was a photo, the bathroom mirror in his new apartment, and on it, written in dripping letters, "Let me out. Story, the end." It was the kind of party you don't forget. Loud music, way too many people packed into a house that wasn't built for more than a dozen, and the kind of energy that makes you feel like you're 20 feet above your body. It had started as a Halloween get-together. Costumes, fake cobwebs, punch bowls spiked with whatever someone brought in a plastic bottle. But by midnight, most of the people who knew the host personally had either passed out or vanished, and the house had filled with strangers. That's what happens when someone shares the address on social media. The house was an old two-story that belonged to Drew's uncle. He'd moved out of state for work and left it vacant, so Drew offered to keep an eye on it during the fall semester. He lived there rent-free on the condition he didn't destroy the place, which to Drew meant only cleaning up before his uncle came back for the holidays. I'd shown up around 10 with a couple friends, Maddie and Sergio, both wearing half-hearted costumes. I was dressed as a skeleton, black hoodie and jeans with glow-in-the-dark bones painted on. Maddie had on cat ears and eyeliner whiskers, and Sergio wore a bloody doctor's coat that didn't fit him. It wasn't really our scene, but we needed a break after a rough week of midterms. The night itself went how you'd expect. Music, drinks, dancing, laughing, until things turned weird. It started with the cold spots. Not just one or two. Whole areas of the house felt like someone had opened a freezer door and left it that way. The living room would feel normal, but the hallway near the guest bathroom chilled your skin and made your breath visible. Maddie mentioned it first. She'd gone to the bathroom and came back rubbing her arms. "It's freezing over there," she said, grabbing Sergio's drink and taking a sip. "Like, way colder than it should be." I shrugged it off at first. The house was old, probably drafty, and with so many people opening and closing doors, I figured it was nothing. But then I went to the kitchen to grab a bottle of water and felt it too. Not just cold, but sharp, like a cold that sank into your teeth. By 2 a.m., most of the crowd had left. The energy had drained out of the house. A few people still lingered. 4 or 5 in the living room, 2 sitting on the stairs, and a couple upstairs who disappeared into one of the bedrooms. Maddie had passed out in a chair. Sergio was finishing the rest of someone's beer, and I was standing by the window, trying to figure out if I should call a ride or stay over. Then the lights flickered. Not a surge, not a quick dim. They flickered like candlelight, erratic, almost rhythmic. And then the music cut out mid-song. A couple people shouted joking complaints, but it didn't come back on. I went over to the speaker, checked the Bluetooth connection, then the power. Everything was plugged in, but nothing worked. "Maybe the power went out?" Sergio offered. But the kitchen light was still on. So were the upstairs hallway lights. That's when the knocking started. It came from the back door. 3 slow, hollow knocks. Everyone heard it. You could feel the room stiffen. Drew looked around from where he was sitting, clearly confused. "Did someone leave the gate open?" he asked. The backyard was fenced, and the only gate led to a wooded path behind the property. Nobody answered, so Drew got up and headed toward the back. I followed, curiosity stronger than whatever gut feeling was telling me not to. He opened the door and stepped outside. The motion light above the porch clicked on. We both peered into the backyard, expecting to see someone there, maybe a drunk friend trying to get back in. But no one was there. The yard was empty. The gate was shut. The wind had picked up, rattling a loose length of chain on the fence, but otherwise, nothing. Then Drew said, "Wait." He pointed toward the corner of the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light. There was something standing there. It took me a second to register it. It was so still, so perfectly dark, it looked like a part of the tree line. But then it moved, a shift of its head, a small step forward. I froze. "Hey," Drew called out, half drunk and irritated. "Party's over, man." No response. The figure turned slowly, like it was pivoting in place, and walked into the trees. Just disappeared. We both just stood there for a second, staring at the spot it had vanished into. Then Drew let out a forced laugh. Probably just someone messing around. He shut the door and locked it. Back in the living room, things had gotten quieter. Maddie was awake now, sitting upright with a tense look on her face. Sergio had noticed it too. "Something's weird about this house," Maddie said. I didn't argue. I sat next to her, trying to play it down, even though the hairs on the back of my neck hadn't stopped rising since that thing in the yard. "Let's just sleep it off," Sergio said. "We'll head out in the morning." We agreed. The 3 of us claimed the guest room upstairs, figuring it was safer than passing out in the living room. Drew and the remaining guests stayed downstairs. It took a while for any of us to fall asleep. The room was stuffy, the kind that made it hard to breathe. I lay on the floor in a sleeping bag someone had left behind, while Maddie and Sergio shared the bed. We didn't talk much, just tried to settle in. Around 4 a.m., I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. Then I heard it, a creaking sound, like someone walking down the hall. I thought maybe it was Drew going to the bathroom, but it didn't stop. The footsteps moved past our door, then back again. Then they stopped right outside. I held my breath. The door creaked open. It was slow, painfully slow. The hallway light was off, so the room filled with this deep, oily darkness that seemed to flow in through the opening. I whispered, "Sergio?" He didn't respond. "Maddie?" Still nothing. Then something stepped into the room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. There were no footsteps this time, no shuffling, just silence and the presence of someone else in the room. I couldn't see them, but I felt it, like heat pressing on my skin. And then the closet door opened. It wasn't loud, just the soft clack of the knob turning, the hinges groaning. I stared into the dark, willing my eyes to adjust. For a split second, I saw something. A face, not a person. Not really, just a shape of a face. Pale, long, eyes too far apart, watching me, watching all of us. Then it was gone. The closet door was shut. The bedroom door, too. I finally moved. Sat up, heart racing. Sergio stirred. "What are you doing?" "There was someone in here," I whispered. Maddie sat up, too. "What?" I swear, the door opened. Something came in. We all looked toward the closet. It was closed. Still, but the bottom edge, it was glowing. A soft, dim blue light seeped out from underneath it, like moonlight through water. Sergio got out of bed, walked over, and hesitated. "Don't," Maddie whispered. But he did. He opened the closet. Nothing inside, just clothes and boxes, and a weird smell, like mold, wet dirt, and something metallic. We didn't sleep after that. At dawn, we gathered our things and got ready to leave. Downstairs, the living room was empty. Drew was gone, so were the other guests. At first, we thought maybe they'd left while we slept, but Drew's car was still in the driveway. So were all the other cars. We searched the house, every room, every closet, even the basement. No one. No signs of anyone having packed up or left. Just silence. We left the house and didn't look back. A week later, Drew's uncle came back early, had heard nothing from Drew, and got worried. The police got involved. Drew's phone was found in the backyard, screen cracked, battery dead. He was never found. No one who stayed behind that night was. The people who left before 2 a.m., they were fine. We talked to some of them later. None of them had felt anything strange. It was like whatever happened started after the party had died down. Sometimes I wonder if we were supposed to stay too. If the only reason we're still here is because we all felt it, whatever was in that house, and chose to leave before it finished whatever it started. But sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, cold air pressing against my face, and I think about the closet door. Sometimes I hear it creak, even when I'm in my apartment, even when there's no closet near me. Story the end. It started as one of those nights where everything felt like it could go on forever. We were all packed into Nadia's apartment in downtown Charleston celebrating her birthday. It was a third-floor unit in one of those pre-war brick buildings with heavy wood doors and narrow staircases. The kind of place that had personality, creaks in the floor, and old paint that refused to stay on the walls. Her apartment wasn't big, but we crammed about 30 people in there. Friends from school, coworkers, her neighbors from the second floor, and even a few strangers who tagged along with others. The party had that golden hour energy, the kind where everyone's tipsy but not sloppy, and the music from someone's phone speaker felt good enough to dance to. I was there with my roommate, Chelsea, and our friend group, Milo, Candace, and Jesse. We'd known Nadia for just under a year. She was cool, always organizing movie nights and pulling people into things, but she was a little private, especially when it came to her apartment. She'd only started having people over recently, and I remember thinking how weird that was for someone so social. At around 1:30 a.m., most of the crowd began trickling out. Some called rides, some walked to bars nearby, and others went downstairs to their apartments. The rest of us, me, Chelsea, Milo, Candace, Jesse, and a few of Nadia's closer friends, stuck around to help clean up and keep drinking. Nadia called it the after party, and someone ordered pizza. There were maybe 10 of us left. Around 2:15 a.m., we were gathered in the living room. The lights were low, and the floor was littered with empty Solo cups, bottle caps, and half-eaten snacks. That's when Nadia told us the story. "You guys ever hear about the woman who used to live in this apartment? she asked, sitting cross-legged on her couch, nursing a vodka soda. Candace leaned in. No, but that already sounds ominous. Nadia looked around and lowered her voice. She lived here alone in the early 2000s. Her name was Marion. She was in her late 20s and worked nights at the hospital. According to the guy who leased me the apartment, one night she came home, locked the door, and just never came out. No signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, just gone. We all stared at her. What do you mean, gone? Milo asked. Exactly that, Nadia said. Her car was outside. Purse and phone were in the kitchen. The bed wasn't even slept in. The landlord said they had to break the door down after 2 weeks of silence. Jessie gave a low whistle. That's messed up. Chelsea raised an eyebrow. Is that true or just some spooky landlord tale to mess with you? Nadia shrugged. He seemed serious, and there's weird stuff here sometimes. Like what? I asked. She glanced over her shoulder at the hallway. Stuff moving, lights flickering, the mirror in the bathroom fogs up even when no one's taken a shower. And sometimes I hear humming. We all went quiet. Candace tried to laugh it off, but it came out nervous. Okay, you're just trying to freak us out now. Nadia stood and walked over to a cabinet near the front door. She opened it and pulled out a notebook. I started writing down when weird things happen, she said. This is just from the last 2 months. She handed it to me. I flipped through pages filled with dates, times, and short notes. Feb 11th, 2:17 a.m., footsteps in hallway, no one home but me. Feb 18th, 1:03 a.m., mirror fogged up again, smelled like perfume. Feb 26th, 3:40 a.m., door to bedroom slammed shut, no windows open. I passed the notebook around. It felt strange holding it, like whatever she'd written down had weight. That's when the light in the hallway flickered. Just for a second, but we all saw it. Everyone looked at Nadia. She didn't smile. It's been doing that a lot lately, she said. No one said much after that. I think we all got a little uneasy. Around 2:45 a.m., half the group decided to call it a night. That left me, Chelsea, Milo, Jessie, and Nadia. We were too wired to sleep and too spooked to just sit around, so someone suggested we try to make contact. It wasn't my idea. In fact, I remember saying, "Are you serious?" But Jessie was already clearing space on the coffee table. He grabbed a piece of cardboard from a pizza box and made a makeshift spirit board with a marker. Nadia found a small wine glass to use as a planchette. You know this is dumb, right? Chelsea said. Definitely, Milo agreed, but we're doing it anyway. We sat in a circle, fingertips on the upside-down wine glass. Nadia asked the first question. Is anyone here with us? Nothing. We waited, but the glass didn't move. Jessie smirked. Guess the ghost is shy. Maybe you scared her off? Candace joked from across the room before she left. Nadia tried again. Marion, are you here? This time, the glass vibrated slightly under our fingers. Chelsea's eyes widened. Was that one of you? We all shook our heads. The glass slid slowly to the yes written in marker. Everyone froze. Someone's pushing it, I said quickly. No way, Jessie replied. I barely touched it. Marion, Nadia continued, her voice softer, did something happen to you in this apartment? The glass stayed still for a few seconds. Then it moved again. S-E-E-P. Sleep? Chelsea said. Is that where she was taken? I asked. The glass moved again. T-H-E-Y. They. My throat went dry. Who's they? No response. Then the lights flickered again. The hallway light blinked off completely. We all jumped. Jessie stood up. Okay, that's enough. Joke's over. But no one was laughing. We left the spirit board on the table and got up to stretch our legs. I went into the kitchen for water. Nadia followed, standing by the sink. She looked anxious. I've never tried that before. I didn't think it would actually do something. Maybe we just freaked ourselves out, I offered, though I didn't believe it. That's when we heard Chelsea scream. We ran into the living room. She was backed against the wall, eyes wide, pointing at the hallway. There was someone standing there, she gasped, in the dark. Milo turned on his phone light and shone it down the hall. Nothing. I swear to God, Chelsea said. Right before the light flickered, I saw a woman, pale, black hair. She just stood there. Nadia looked pale. That's where the humming usually comes from. That's when the front door, completely locked, shook violently, like someone on the other side slammed their fists against it once. Just once. We all screamed. The air got heavy, oppressive. It felt like being underwater. My ears rang and my skin prickled all over. We backed away from the door and huddled in the center of the room. Jesse picked up a chair and held it in front of him like a shield. Then silence. Just complete silence. No cars outside, no city noise, no hum of the refrigerator. Even our phones had no service. The clock on the microwave blinked off. We stood there barely breathing. Then a soft humming began, coming from the bathroom down the hall. Nadia began to cry. That's her. That's what I hear. That's Marion. The humming grew louder, high-pitched, almost childlike. We didn't speak, didn't move. None of us dared go into that hallway. Then the bathroom door slammed shut. We all jumped again. Chelsea grabbed my arm so tightly her nails left marks. Jesse finally said, "We need to leave, right now." No one argued. We moved fast, grabbing keys and shoes. Like when Jesse reached for the front door, it wouldn't open. It was locked, obviously, but the deadbolt wouldn't turn. He struggled, twisting it left and right. "Open it," Milo shouted. "I'm trying." Nadia ran into the kitchen and grabbed her keys. She tried the door too, but it wouldn't budge. Then the humming stopped. We all stood frozen. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Suddenly, all the lights in the apartment turned on at once. Bright. Blinding. The microwave beeped back to life. The hallway light returned, and the door unlocked. Just like that. Jesse flung it open, and we all spilled into the hallway. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't check on each other. We just ran. Chelsea and I didn't go home. We sat in her car for 2 hours in a gas station parking lot, talking in whispers, trying to make sense of it. That morning, we tried to call Nadia. No answer. Later that day, Jesse went back to check on her. He knocked, but no one came to the door. The landlord said she had broken her lease and moved out that morning. Just packed up and left. No forwarding address. Nothing. It's been almost a year. None of us have heard from her. Chelsea has trouble sleeping now. She says she sometimes hears humming outside her bedroom window, even though we live on the 4th floor. I stopped going to parties. Sometimes I dream about the apartment. I see the woman standing at the end of the hallway. Her face is pale. Her mouth is open like she's trying to scream, but nothing comes out. I always wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth. I still don't know what happened that night, but it was real. All of it. Story the end. The night started like any other. We were a group of friends in our early 20s, all craving one last wild gathering before summer ended and life shifted into new routines. Jenna had just landed a new job, Mike was moving out of state for grad school, and I was stuck juggling my final semester of college and a part-time job. Somehow, that made the idea of one big after-party irresistible. The location was Nate's grandfather's old cabin, a sprawling wooden structure nestled deep in the woods just outside of town. Nate had inherited it recently, and while most of us weren't exactly thrilled to spend the night in a creaky old place full of cobwebs and musty furniture, the seclusion promised privacy and a chance to let loose. We arrived just before dusk, the sun dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows on the gravel driveway. The cabin stood slightly off from the road, surrounded by dense pines, silent except for the rustling wind. Nate's warning about the place having a weird vibe barely registered with anyone. It was a phrase we tossed around when talking about creepy places, not something to take seriously. Inside, the cabin was rustic but charming in a way. Old photos hung crookedly on the walls, faded with time. The fireplace was cold and a few lamps flickered weakly, but it was enough light for us to set up. Someone tossed on some music, and before long, the place was filled with laughter, loud voices, and the clinking of bottles. By midnight, the party was in full swing. About 20 people filled the room, spilling out onto the porch, some sitting around a bonfire Nate had built outside. The air was thick with smoke and the buzz of alcohol. For a while, the woods seemed nothing more than a dark backdrop to our revelry. At some point, Mike disappeared. Not a big deal at first. We figured he went outside for a smoke or some air. Jenna and I went to check the kitchen where Nate was mixing drinks, and no one seemed concerned. But then the music started cutting out. One moment the speakers blasted, the next, silence. A few people grumbled, but thought it was a technical glitch. I noticed something strange in the corner of the living room. A faint outline, like a shadow, but it didn't belong to anyone there. I blinked and looked again. It was gone. I told Jenna, but she shrugged it off. Then the power flickered. Lights went out completely for a moment, plunging us into pitch black. Phones flickered on, flashlight apps casting beams around the room, People laughed nervously, teasing each other about ghosts. That's when the knocking started. It was coming from the walls, soft and deliberate, like someone tapping from the other side. It echoed faintly through the cabin. The noise wasn't consistent, sometimes slow and steady, other times frantic. We all stopped talking, eyes wide. Nate tried to joke. Old cabin noises, right? Probably a raccoon or something. But no one laughed. Jenna shivered and pulled her jacket tighter. Maybe we should call it a night, she whispered. A few agreed, starting to gather their things, but others wanted to stay, convinced it was just their imaginations. Then a scream tore through the air. It was Mike. Everyone froze. The scream came from upstairs. We rushed toward the staircase, but the moment we stepped into the narrow hallway, a cold gust of wind hit us. The temperature dropped sharply, breaths visible in the air despite the summer night outside. Mike was nowhere to be seen. We called his name repeatedly, our voices cracking. Jenna pushed open the door to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Inside, the bed was empty. On the floor lay Mike's phone, screen cracked but still lit. His jacket was draped over a chair. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, making us jump. I reached out, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. We banged and yelled for help, but no one heard. After what felt like forever, the door clicked and opened. We stumbled out, hearts pounding. Everyone was on edge now. Then the real terror began. That night, the knocking turned into whispering, unintelligible words that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Doors opened and closed on their own. Shadows darted just beyond the reach of the flashlights. Jenna swore she saw a man standing in the corner of the living room, wearing old-fashioned clothes, pale and unmoving. When she blinked, he was gone. I started hearing footsteps behind me, slow and steady, but whenever I turned, no one was there. At one point, Nate disappeared. We found his backpack on the porch, but no sign of him. One by one, people started leaving, driven by fear and unease. I stayed with Jenna, unwilling to face the darkness alone. Around 4 a.m., as the sky began to lighten, Jenna woke me with a frantic shake. "He's here," she whispered, eyes wide. I looked toward the window. Outside, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure, tall, thin, and shadowed. No face, just darkness where features should be. It watched us silently. We locked the doors and windows, but the feeling didn't leave. By dawn, everyone had gone except Jenna and me. We packed in silence and left the cabin behind, the air heavy with something unspoken. Months later, I found out Nate was never seen again. His family sold the cabin, claiming the place was cursed. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear knocking from the walls in my own apartment. And when I close my eyes, I see that figure watching from the woods, waiting. Story the end. It was one of those nights where everything seemed ordinary at first. Just a typical after party at Jake's new apartment on the edge of town. The kind of place he'd scored for cheap because it was old and a little rundown, but spacious and perfect for a crowd. After the big house party had finally died down, a small group of us stayed behind, 8 in total, me included, to keep the night going, laughing too loud and drinking too much in the dimly lit living room. Jake's place had character. The hardwood floors creaked beneath our feet, and the air smelled faintly of old wood and damp plaster. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, faded and yellowing at the edges. There was a chill in the air that didn't seem to fit the early spring evening, even with the windows cracked open. At some point, the music faded to background noise. We were all sprawled across the living room. Pillows and blankets scattered around, half-empty bottles littered the coffee table. It was just us, the quiet and the occasional hum of the city outside. I was sitting next to Amanda on the couch. She was scrolling through her phone, half listening as Jake, the host, started telling a story about the apartment's history. He'd only moved in a few weeks earlier and mentioned hearing strange noises at night. Footsteps in the hall, doors creaking open by themselves, whispers he couldn't quite place. "Probably just the old pipes or the heating," he said, waving it off. But there was a hesitation in his voice, like he didn't really believe it either. Amanda laughed nervously. "Or maybe you've got a ghost roommate now." That got a few chuckles, but it settled quickly. The room felt a little heavier, as if those words had stirred something. It was around 3:30 a.m. when the first strange thing happened. We'd been sitting in near silence, the haze of alcohol and fatigue settling in, when we all heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing just outside the living room door. Not hurried or panicked, just steady and soft. Jake's eyes darted toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Probably someone in the building, he muttered, but no one moved to check. The footsteps stopped. Then, after a moment, a door down the hall, the one to the spare bedroom, creaked open slowly, the hinges groaning as if weighted by some unseen hand. We all froze. Amanda whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, just silence. Kevin, usually the bravest of the group, got up to investigate. "It's probably just Jake's cat or something," he joked, trying to keep it light. The rest of us forced weak smiles, but the unease was spreading. Kevin moved down the hallway, every step making the old floorboards moan beneath him. We could hear him reach for the door, then pause. He pushed it open with a slow creak. After a few seconds, he called back, "No one here. No cat either." Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. Almost immediately after Kevin returned, the door slammed shut behind him with a sharp bang that echoed through the apartment. Amanda jumped. "Okay, that wasn't the cat." We all laughed nervously, but none of us wanted to go back there. That's when the lights flickered. First, just a brief pulse, then the entire room went dark for a second before the overhead light buzzed back to life. The dim glow of streetlights filtered through the windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. Jake frowned. Must be the wiring. But none of us were convinced. The air grew colder, so suddenly it was like someone had turned off the heat entirely. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, shivering despite the warmth of the night outside. Amanda's eyes were wide. "Guys, I really don't like this." "No kidding," Kevin said. Then came the whisper. At first, it was nothing more than a faint, indecipherable murmur, a breathy voice just beyond the edge of hearing, like the wind sighing through dry leaves. We strained to listen. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, but still impossible to make out. It seemed to be coming from the hallway, the same one with the open bedroom door. Jake stood up, his face pale. "Who's there? Show yourself." No reply, just the whisper. The lights flickered again, and for a moment the glow of the lamp on the far side of the room stretched and warped, making the shadows dance unnaturally. Then the music started, soft, staticky, like a distant radio tuning in and out. None of us had touched the speaker. Amanda grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here." But when we tried to move toward the front door, it slammed shut with a force that rattled the windows. The old lock clicked, as if someone had latched it from the outside. Panic began to rise. Kevin tried the door, pulling at the handle. It didn't budge. Jake pounded on it. "Let me out, please!" The whispering shifted then, becoming a low, guttural chant, unintelligible but undeniably hostile. Amanda was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We're trapped." Then the spare bedroom door creaked open wider, the darkness inside swallowing the weak light from the hall. A shape appeared, a woman, translucent and pale, with long, wet hair hanging over her face. Her eyes were empty black voids, bleeding darkness that pooled at her feet. She moved slowly, feet bare on the hardwood, wearing a soaked nightgown that trailed behind her. None of us could move. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She stepped into the hallway. Kevin screamed, breaking the paralysis, and lunged toward the door. But it slammed shut in his face. The woman's head snapped toward us, and the whispering turned into a deafening roar inside our heads. Jake stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. The light shattered, plunging the room into near darkness. I felt cold fingers brush my neck, like someone breathing on my skin from behind. Amanda screamed. The woman faded away, and the front door suddenly flew open. We didn't hesitate. We ran out into the early morning air, gasping for breath. The apartment was silent behind us. Days later, police found out the previous occupant's teenage daughter had drowned in the bathtub there months before. Her body was never found. The family moved away quietly. Jake's apartment has been empty since. We don't talk about that night much, but whenever the city is quiet and I'm alone, I can still hear the whispering, soft, mournful, and always calling. Story. The end. The summer had been long, the kind of summer that felt endless when you were young. Weeks of nothing but sunlight and freedom stretching ahead. As the days grew shorter and the new school year approached, a small group of friends decided to throw one last party before everything changed. It wasn't supposed to be anything big, just a handful of people at Eric's parents' old house. an old Victorian-style place on the edge of town. The house had been empty for months since his parents moved out, and Eric's parents had given him permission to use it for the weekend. They figured the old place would be perfect for a casual gathering, just music, a few drinks, and people to hang out with before summer ended. The house was old and creaky, with wood floors that groaned underfoot and narrow staircases that seemed to twist unnaturally. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, something earthy, like the house was still breathing under layers of paint and forgotten memories. The friends didn't mind. To them, the atmosphere added to the vibe of the party, made it feel like an adventure. By midnight, the party was in full swing. People spilled into every room, the living room filled with laughter and music, the kitchen crowded with people refilling their cups. The basement was open, but most avoided it. It was too dark, and the stairs gave off an ominous creak every time someone went down. Eric himself had never been down there alone. Among the guests were Eric's closest friends, Jenna, Lucas, and Maya. They had all grown up together, but tonight the crowd included new faces, kids from other schools, some they barely knew. The energy was high, and the drinks flowed freely. Around 2 a.m., the party started to lose steam. People were slumped on couches, talking quietly or passed out in corners. Eric noticed Maya wasn't around. He looked for her upstairs, thinking she might have gone to freshen up, but she was nowhere to be found. He found Lucas in the living room, half asleep. "Have you seen Maya?" Lucas shook his head. "No, I thought she went home earlier." "Maybe she slipped out the back," Jenna suggested, yawning. Eric went outside to check the backyard, calling Maya's name. The night was quiet, only the rustle of trees and distant sounds of cars. No sign of Maya. He decided to check the basement. There was a faint light under the door, which surprised him. Usually the basement lights were off. He hesitated but pushed the door open. The stairs groaned, and a cold wave of air washed over him. At the bottom, the basement was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The room was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, covered in sheets. Eric called out, "Maya? You down here?" No answer. He moved toward the far corner and froze. On the wall, there was something written in what looked like dark red paint or blood. "Don't stay." Eric's heart pounded. He didn't know if it was a prank or something else, but a chill ran down his spine. He turned to leave and caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye, a shadow shifting near the staircase. He blinked, and it was gone. He rushed upstairs and told Jenna and Lucas what he saw. They were skeptical but agreed to call it a night and get some sleep. Eric went to check the guest room where Maya was supposed to be staying, but the bed was empty and the window was cracked open. The air was icy, the curtain fluttering like a ghost's whisper. "Maybe she left," Lucas said, trying to sound casual. The next morning, Maya was still missing. Her phone was found on the kitchen table, unattended. Her parents were called, and the police started a search. The local community rallied, spreading the word and organizing search parties. Days passed. No sign of Maya. The house sat empty, an oppressive silence settling over it. Eric felt like the walls themselves were watching him. One night, unable to sleep, Eric decided to go back to the house. He needed answers. Maybe Maya had left a clue. The moon was high, casting silver light through broken curtains. The house was colder than he remembered. As he stepped inside, he heard faint music, like a distant radio playing a haunting melody he couldn't place. He followed the sound to the basement door. It was open. His heart raced as he descended the stairs. The basement was darker than before, the single bulb gone out. In the corner, a figure sat, head bowed. Eric called out, "Maya?" The figure lifted its head. It wasn't Maya. Her face was pale, almost translucent, eyes hollow and empty. She smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that didn't reach her eyes. "Why did you come back?" she whispered, voice echoing like a chill wind. Eric stumbled back, heart thudding. "I was waiting," she said. "Waiting for you." The figure reached out, fingers thin and cold as ice. Eric screamed and ran upstairs, slamming the door behind him. He didn't sleep again that night. In the following weeks, strange things happened. Lights flickered on and off. Objects moved on their own. Whispers echoed through empty rooms. Friends who came to check on Eric reported cold spots and feelings of dread. The police never found any evidence of foul play. Maya's disappearance remained a mystery. Eric eventually left town, but the memory of that night and the face in the basement haunted him forever. Story, the end. The night was supposed to be unforgettable for all the right reasons. It was the last big party before summer break, a celebration marking the end of the school year and the beginning of endless possibilities. We had rented out an old house on the outskirts of town, a place that everyone said was charming but creaky, the kind of place with more history than the local library. We didn't care much about the warnings or rumors that floated around campus about the house's past, ghosts, tragedies, unexplained noises, because those were just stories, right? By 9 p.m., the house was already packed. Students from different classes, some friends I barely knew, were filling every corner with chatter, laughter, and the steady pulse of bass that seemed to vibrate through the walls and into our bones. The living room was the main stage, with the music blasting from a makeshift speaker system, people dancing, drinking, and generally making fools of themselves. Upstairs, the bedrooms were mostly empty, but a few people had crashed out already, exhausted from a long week. The porch was crowded with smokers and people seeking a breath of fresh air. I was there with my closest friends, Jesse, Mark, and Sam. We'd been inseparable since freshman year, and this night felt like a last chance to make a memory we could all hold on to before we scattered to different cities for internships and jobs. The atmosphere was electric, the kind of buzz that makes you feel invincible. But beneath the surface, a tension was building, something subtle that no one really noticed at first. Jessie disappeared for a while around midnight. We thought she had gone outside or maybe stepped into the kitchen for another drink. Mark and I stayed near the living room, joking and watching the crowd, while Sam wandered off to check on some friends upstairs. The night was a blur of noise and motion, the kind of wildness that makes your heads spin but your heart race with excitement. Then around 2 a.m., the power flickered. It wasn't unusual for this old house. The wiring was outdated, and brownouts happened sometimes during storms or when too many people drained the circuit. The music stuttered and then cut out completely, leaving us in near darkness. The only light came from the weak glow of our phones and the few candles someone had lit to keep the shadows at bay. People groaned and began to stumble toward the stairs or the front door, hoping to find better reception or a way out. I decided to check on Jessie, who still hadn't come back. I called her name softly as I moved through the crowd, but no response. Then I headed upstairs. The hallway was dim and smelled faintly of mildew and old wood. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. I stopped outside her bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and called out again. No answer. Inside, the room was cold, unnaturally so for a humid June night. I noticed her phone on the bed, screen cracked but still glowing softly with a paused music app. The window was open, letting in a breeze that fluttered the curtains. I stepped inside and saw something on the floor, a smear of dark liquid trailing from the corner of the room toward the closet. My heart skipped. I knelt down and touched it. It was sticky, not water. I pulled back, uneasy. Something was wrong. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and tried the handle. Locked. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one came. The house was eerily silent, except for the distant murmur of voices downstairs and the soft dripping sound coming from somewhere behind me. The closet door creaked open slowly. A chill washed over me. I forced myself to look inside. The closet was empty, except for a single coat hanging on a hook. But as I stared, I saw the coat begin to move as if something invisible was wearing it. The air turned frigid, and the dripping sound grew louder, like water falling onto a hard surface. I backed away, my breath visible in the cold air. Then the lights flickered back on downstairs, and with them the music resumed, muffled but unmistakable. The door clicked and unlocked. I rushed out, heart pounding, and slammed the door behind me. I found Mark and Sam in the hallway, faces pale. "Jessie?" Mark asked. "I was in her room," I said. "Something's wrong." We moved together downstairs where the party was restarting, people still oblivious to what had just happened. Jessie wasn't anywhere. We called her phone. It rang once from somewhere near the basement. The basement was a small, cramped space, mostly used for storage. The stairs groaned under our weight as we descended. The phone's ringtone echoed off the concrete walls. At the bottom, the light bulb overhead flickered violently before burning out. plunging us into darkness. We heard it then, a whisper, barely audible, coming from the far corner. "Help me." The phone lay on the floor, screen cracked but alive. We shone our phone flashlights toward the sound, nothing but old boxes and cobwebs. Then a shape moved in the shadows, a figure, pale and dripping, with long dark hair covering its face. It stepped forward, revealing hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Mark screamed and stumbled back up the stairs. Sam grabbed my arm. The figure vanished. We ran out of the basement as heartbeats, hammering. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking. Jessie was nowhere to be found. We never saw her again. Weeks later, the police found no evidence of foul play, only her abandoned phone at the party house. The landlord told us the place had a history. A young woman drowned in the basement decades ago. Her body never recovered. Every year after big parties, people reported strange noises, sudden cold spots, and a feeling of being watched. We never went back, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear her whisper in my dreams, "Help me." Story the end. The night started out like any other college party. Loud music booming through the walls of the old Victorian house, the smell of cheap beer and sweat mixing in the crowded rooms, and the distant chatter of people who barely knew each other, but were united by the desire to let loose. It was the end of the semester, and everyone was desperate for a break from the constant stress of exams and papers. Drew's house was the perfect spot. A little rundown, a little creepy, but spacious enough for a big crowd. I didn't plan on staying long. I went with a group of friends just to say hello and maybe have a few drinks, then head home before things got out of hand. But the party was alive, and I got caught up in the buzz. Around midnight, the crowd had thinned, or at least that's what it felt like inside. Outside, the fog had started rolling in thick and heavy, cloaking the street lamps and swallowing the sidewalk. It was the kind of fog that made even the most familiar places feel strange and unfamiliar. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a water bottle from the fridge when I heard the first odd noise. It wasn't loud, just a soft scratching at the back door, like nails lightly scraping against wood. I froze, staring at the door for a moment, then shrugged it off. Probably some drunk messing around. Parties like this always attracted the weirdos. But then the scratching came again. Louder this time, more deliberate. I stepped closer and peered out the window. Nothing. Just the fog swirling outside, twisted branches tapping against the glass. I turned away, my heart still racing a little. As I moved to head back to the living room, a sudden cold swept through the kitchen, chilling me from head to toe. It was unnatural, like someone had opened a window, but all the windows were shut. The music downstairs was fading into silence as people started leaving or passing out. I was about to call my ride when the power cut out. The entire house went black except for the faint glow of the emergency exit sign over the front door. I felt my way along the wall toward the stairs, but the darkness seemed to press in, thicker than it should be. As I reached the bottom step, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow, almost like a person, standing just beyond the doorway to the basement. I called out, but no one answered. The shadow didn't move, just stood there, watching. I told myself it was just my imagination and climbed the stairs quickly. When I got back into the main hall, I saw a group of friends still hanging around near the fireplace, faces pale in the dim light of their phone screens. "Did you guys see that?" I asked. "See what?" Maddie said, looking up from her phone. "There's something. Downstairs. In the basement." They exchanged uneasy looks but didn't say much. We decided to leave. The front door was stuck. It wouldn't budge no matter how hard we pulled. Panic started creeping in. Suddenly a loud bang echoed from the basement, like something heavy had slammed against the walls. The sound vibrated through the floor. Sergio, always the bravest of us, grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the basement door. "Wait," I said, trying to stop him. "We don't know what's down there." But he pushed past me and turned the knob. The door was unlocked. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness as he descended the steps, and we followed, hearts pounding. The basement was cold and smelled damp, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. At the bottom, the light flickered, revealing old furniture draped in white sheets and a large mirror leaning against the far wall. The scratching noise was louder now, coming from behind the mirror. Sergio approached slowly, shining the light over the dusty floorboards. Suddenly, The mirror shattered, sending shards flying. We all jumped out, and the flashlight went out. In the sudden pitch-black silence, I heard a voice whisper my name, soft and chilling. It wasn't Sergio's voice or anyone I knew. It was hollow, distant. We scrambled up the stairs, but the basement door slam-jumped shut behind us, trapping us in the dark. Frantically, we tried the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Then the walls seemed to close in, and a cold, oppressive feeling filled the air. I felt something brush past me, a shadow, intangible but heavy. We screamed and banged on the door until finally, with a loud click, it opened. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping in the cold night air. The fog had thickened, and the street was empty. When we turned back toward the house, the lights flickered on, and the music started playing again, faint but unmistakable. We never went back inside. Drew was missing the next day. The police searched the house but found no trace of him or the others who had stayed late. To this day, the house sits empty, the porch light flickering at night, and sometimes if you stand outside when the fog is thick, you can hear the faint sound of music and scratching at the back door. Story, the end. It was a typical Friday night, the kind where the city thrums with energy and the streets fill up with laughter and music spilling out of every bar and apartment window. We had been looking forward to this party for weeks, a birthday celebration for our friend Carla, held at her new place, an old townhouse nestled deep in one of the quieter neighborhoods downtown. The kind of place with creaky floors and thin walls, the kind that always seemed to hold secrets. Carla's townhouse was beautiful in a worn, vintage way. She had spent months fixing it up, peeling back layers of wallpaper and refinishing the hardwood floors. The living room had high ceilings and tall windows that let in the streetlight glow. It was the perfect place for a party. The crowd was a mix of people, friends from college, co-workers, a few of Carla's neighbors, and some new faces we didn't know. We were all in high spirits, drinking, dancing, and sharing stories. The music was loud, but not so loud you couldn't hear someone whisper, and the air smelled faintly of perfume and spilled beer. By midnight, the apartment was packed. People had spilled into every room, some sitting on the floor, others leaning against the walls. The atmosphere was electric, the kind of chaotic joy you only get from a night full of good people and no worries. Around 2 a.m., most of the crowd had thinned out. Carla's neighbors upstairs and downstairs had finally put in noise complaints, so the volume had been turned down. A smaller group of us remained, scattered between the kitchen and the living room, nursing drinks and smoking cigarettes by the back door. That's when the weird stuff started. It began subtly. I was in the kitchen with Carla and a few others, talking and laughing when I noticed the lights flicker for a moment. It wasn't a big deal. Old houses have quirky wiring sometimes, but the flicker happened again, and this time the lights dimmed and brightened in a slow, uneven rhythm. Carla glanced up, frowning. "Must be the wiring," she said, rubbing the back of her neck. "I need to get an electrician." We shrugged it off and moved back to the living room, where Milo and Jen were setting up a little game of Cards Against Humanity. The laughter was loud, but then the music cut out suddenly. The speakers went silent, and the room felt like it swallowed the noise all at once. Someone swore they saw a shadow move just past the doorway, but it was probably just someone walking by. Carla excused herself to check the breaker box downstairs. When she didn't come back after a few minutes, a couple of us went to look for her. The basement door was slightly ajar. Carla was standing there, staring into the darkness, her face pale. "The breaker's fine," she said, voice shaky, "but I swear I heard something." We laughed nervously. "You're just spooked, Carla. It's an old house." We convinced her to come back upstairs, but the unease lingered. Back in the living room, the lights flickered again, this time more violently. Some of the bulbs popped, and the power surged, causing the whole apartment to briefly plunge into darkness before the backup generator, or whatever kept the place running, kicked in. The room was tense. People were whispering, casting glances at the windows and the corners of the room. That's when I felt it, a cold draft that wasn't coming from any window or door. The temperature dropped sharply, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I looked around, and everyone else seemed to feel it too. Then the music started again, low at first, almost like a distant hum, but it grew louder until it was the same playlist we'd been playing earlier. except this time, no one was controlling the speakers. "Who's playing the music?" Jen asked, frowning. "No one," Milo said. "I didn't touch anything." Suddenly, the front door slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed through the apartment, making everyone jump. Carla rushed over and tried the door handle. It was locked tight. "This isn't funny anymore," she said, her voice trembling. We moved to the door, pulling on it, but it didn't budge. The windows were all closed and locked, and the back door was the same. Then the lights started flickering wildly, the bulbs popping one by one until the apartment was lit only by the soft glow of the streetlights through the windows. That's when the knocking began. At first, it was soft, almost tentative, a slow rap, like someone tapping their fingernails on wood, but it came from inside the apartment, from the walls themselves. "Did you hear that?" Carla whispered. We all nodded, frozen in place. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, coming from the walls on every side. The floorboards creaked, and we heard footsteps above us, even though the neighbors had said they'd all gone to bed. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, like wind through the trees, but unmistakably voices. We strained to listen. "Help me. Don't leave. Stay." No one spoke. No one moved. Then the bathroom door opened slowly by itself, creaking on rusty hinges. We all watched as it swung open wider and wider until it was fully ajar. Inside, the mirror fogged up even though no one was in there and no shower had been running. The whispers turned into sobbing, a deep, guttural cry that echoed through the apartment. Jen burst into tears. I felt a sudden rush of air on the back of my neck and spun around, but no one was there. Then I saw it, at the edge of my vision, just outside the living room window, a pale figure standing silently on the fire escape. A woman in a long, tattered dress, her hair hanging over her face. I blinked, and she was gone. I told the others, but they said they didn't see anything. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold silence. Carla grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. "Let's get out of here," Milo said urgently. We tried the doors and windows again, but nothing opened. It was like the apartment was sealed shut. Panic set in. Suddenly, the overhead chandelier crashed down, shattering glass everywhere. We all jumped back. "I'm calling 911. Carla shouted, dialing with trembling fingers. No connection. Then the lights flickered back on, all at once. The music stopped. The apartment was still. But the front door was now wide open. We didn't hesitate. We bolted down the stairs, out onto the street, gasping for air, feeling the cold night on our skin. We didn't stop running until we were blocks away. The next day, Carla's landlord told us that the previous tenant had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She was a young woman who lived alone and was known to be reclusive. One night she vanished without a trace. Carla moved out within the week. None of us ever went back. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I still hear that knocking and the soft, desperate sobbing. Story the end. The after party began just after midnight in a nondescript apartment complex on the edge of the city. The main event had been a raucous housewarming party at Sam's new place, a modest 2-bedroom unit he'd just rented in a building with a long history. Most of the guests had already left, either because they lived elsewhere or because they had work in the morning. But a small group of us, close friends from college and work, decided to stick around and keep the night going. Sam's apartment was on the 5th floor, the topmost level of a building that had stood for nearly a century. The elevator was ancient and unreliable, so we took the stairs up in small groups, laughing and joking. The building creaked and groaned with every step, sounds that were easy to dismiss as old wood settling. The place was sparsely furnished, but Sam had brought in a Bluetooth speaker and stocked the fridge with beer and soda. By 1 a.m., the crowd inside had thinned to about 8 people. The energy was mellow. Everyone was a bit buzzed, but still enjoying the night. We sat around the small living room, some on the couch, others on the floor or perched on kitchen stools. The playlist cycled through old rock and modern indie, the music a steady background hum. After a while, the group began to fragment into smaller conversations. I found myself sitting next to Mia, one of our closest friends. We talked about everything and nothing, the usual catch-up banter, until a sudden loud thump made us both jump. The sound seemed to come from the apartment above us. There wasn't supposed to be anyone living above Sam's unit. The building's top floor had been closed off for years due to structural issues. The landlord was supposed to renovate it eventually, but no work had been done in the months since Sam moved in. "Did you hear that?" Mia asked, her voice low. I nodded. "Yeah, what was that?" The others seemed not to have noticed, or at least they didn't comment. A few shrugged it off, saying it was probably something falling or the building shifting. We shrugged and went back to talking, but the sense of unease lingered. A few minutes later, we heard it again. Another thump, this time followed by a faint scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across a floor. "Maybe someone's up there after all?" I suggested. "No way," Sam said firmly. "That floor has been abandoned for years. The landlord won't even let us go up there." "Maybe some kid sneaking around," Mia said nervously. We laughed it off, but a few of us grew quiet, watching the ceiling with growing apprehension. Then the power flickered once, twice, and went out completely. The apartment plunged into darkness. The sudden absence of light and the humming electronics made the silence oppressive. Someone lit a candle, its small flame casting trembling shadows across the walls. We tried the light switches, but nothing worked. Our phones showed no signal, and the battery levels on a couple of devices were dangerously low. "Great," Sam muttered. "Looks like a blackout." The blackout itself wasn't entirely unexpected. Power outages in the area happened occasionally. But what came next was not. From the ceiling, the thumping resumed. Louder this time. Rhythmic. Intentional. Like someone was pounding with a fist or a hammer. We froze. The sound was directly above us. It moved slowly from one end of the ceiling to the other. "Okay, this is freaky," Jess said, clutching her drink tight. "Maybe a maintenance worker," Connor suggested, though his voice wavered. "No one's supposed to be allowed up there," Sam said. Then the scraping came again, harsh and grating, like metal on wood. We all glanced toward the stairwell door, the only exit from the apartment. Suddenly it banged open with a crash. The draft blew out most of the candles. We scrambled to relight them, but the flames were weak. I pulled my jacket tighter, feeling a cold breeze sweep the room despite the sealed windows. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. The door slammed shut on its own. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood floor above us. The footsteps circled the apartment, sometimes light and quick, other times slow and heavy, as if someone or something was pacing. "I'm getting out of here," Mia said, moving toward the door. Before she could reach it, the lights flickered briefly back on, just enough for us to see a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room, near the window. It was tall, thin, and its face was indistinct, blurred in the weak light. We all stared, frozen in place. Then the figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The lights went out again, plunging us back into darkness. More pounding came from the ceiling, faster and more frantic. The apartment seemed to shudder with the force of it. Jess screamed. I grabbed her arm. "Stay calm," I said, though my own voice trembled. We huddled together, listening as the noises continued. Then came a whisper, a single word spoken just above a breath. "Leave," it repeated, over and over, each time louder, more urgent. We looked at each other, eyes wide. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming on the edges of the window panes. Connor tried the door again. It was locked tight. No amount of pulling or banging would open it. "We're trapped," Sam said grimly. Panic set in. Then, as if responding to our fear, the ceiling above us cracked with a deafening roar. Dust and plaster rained down. A long, jagged crack spider-webbed across the ceiling. We all dove to the floor as the ceiling groaned and shifted. Pieces of the old plaster and lath fell like rain. When the noise stopped, the power flickered back on. The apartment was still. No footsteps, no pounding, no whispers. The door now swung open easily. We scrambled out into the hallway, hearts pounding. The hallway was empty and quiet, but the air felt thick with something we couldn't see. We rushed down the stairs and out into the street. The rain had started while we were inside, a steady downpour washing the city clean. The next morning, Sam called the landlord. He learned that the entire top floor had been condemned years ago after a fire. A man named Henry Carmichael had died in the blaze, trapped inside his apartment. His body was never recovered. Rumors circulated that his restless spirit haunted the building, especially the top floor. Neighbors reported strange noises, footsteps, banging, whispers, particularly on stormy nights. Some said he was trying to warn people, or maybe warn himself. None of us went back to the building after that night. The experience stayed with us. Even now, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I sometimes hear faint tapping on the ceiling or a whisper calling my name. And I wonder, was Henry Carmichael trying to tell us something before the fire claimed him? Or was it something darker, something that wanted to trap us there, like it had trapped him? I'll never know. But some nights, when the wind howls just right, I swear I feel a cold presence near me. Story the end. The summer had been a blur of heat, late nights, and restless energy. When school let out, the tight-knit group of friends, Mark, Jenna, Caleb, and Sam, had talked endlessly about one thing: throwing the perfect last party before they all headed off to different colleges. It wasn't meant to be wild or out of control, just a gathering at Mark's uncle's house, a big old rental on the outskirts of their small town. The kind of place that had been vacant for years, with creaky floors and an air of forgotten memories. The night of the party, Mark arrived early with Jenna and Caleb to set up. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by dense woods that swallowed the horizon. The sun was dipping low when they pulled up, and already there was a chill creeping through the air that felt strange for late August. The house was bigger than they expected, with peeling wallpaper, cracked windows, and a musty smell that lingered like a secret. Mark unlocked the front door, and the old hinges groaned loudly, echoing through the empty rooms. They brought in speakers, beer, and snacks, making the living room feel a little less abandoned. Sam showed up an hour later, and by 9 p.m., about 20 people had trickled in, friends from school, a few neighbors, and a couple of unfamiliar faces. The party started slow. Music played from the speakers, laughter bounced off the walls, and conversations grew louder as more people arrived. The old wooden floorboards creaked under the weight of footsteps and dancing feet. Someone had set up a fire pit outside, the flames flickering through the tall trees and casting strange shadows on the house's weathered exterior. Around midnight, the energy shifted. The crowd grew rowdier, fueled by music, alcohol, and the reckless freedom that only comes from knowing you have nowhere to be tomorrow. Mark was in the kitchen when Jenna came rushing in, eyes wide and pale. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. "See what?" Mark asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "There's someone outside near the woods. I thought it was Sam, but when I looked again, they vanished." Mark frowned. He stepped outside with Jenna and Caleb, scanning the edge of the tree line with their phones' flashlights. Nothing. No one. The woods stood still, silent except for the crackling fire and distant sounds of cars passing on the highway. Back inside, the party continued. People laughed, drank, and danced. But Jenna couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept glancing toward the windows, certain she caught glimpses of a shadow moving just beyond the glass. At about 2 a.m., the party had thinned out. Some friends left quietly. Others had fallen asleep on couches and floor cushions. Mark was sitting on the porch steps with Caleb, talking quietly about the upcoming school year when Jenna appeared behind them, pale and trembling. "Something's wrong," she said. "Sam's missing." Mark's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She was with me just a little while ago. Then she went inside to grab her jacket, and I haven't seen her since." They searched the house quickly, calling Sam's name. No response. They checked the backyard and the fire pit area, but the woods swallowed any sound of their voices. The gravel road leading out was empty, with no sign of a car or footsteps. Panic set in. Mark called his parents, who insisted on contacting the police. While waiting, the three friends huddled inside the living room, trying to stay calm. Then, from somewhere deep in the house, they heard a faint noise, soft footsteps on the floor above them. Jenna stood up, heart hammering. "That's not Sam." Caleb grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the staircase. Mark followed close behind. The upstairs hallway was long and dim, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and framed, faded photos of people they didn't know. The footsteps stopped, just past the second bedroom door. Mark pushed it open. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, curtains fluttering in the breeze. On the floor, wet footprints led to the corner, where a series of scratch marks were gouged into the wooden floorboards, deep and jagged, too deliberate to be accidental. Mark swallowed hard. What the hell? Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the room, despite the summer heat outside. The door slammed shut behind them, plunging the room into darkness. The flashlight flickered, then went out. Mark fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking. The hallway outside was silent. Jenna's voice whispered behind him, "Did you see her?" Mark turned slowly. A figure stood in the corner by the window. It was a woman. Her face was pale and expressionless, eyes hollow and black. Her hair hung wet and stringy, her clothes tattered and stained. She didn't move, just stared. Mark's breath caught. The air grew colder, and he could see his own breath fogging in front of him. The woman's mouth moved slowly, forming words that sent a shiver down his spine. "You shouldn't have come back." The flashlight flickered on for a moment, and then the figure was gone. Mark, Jenna, and Caleb bolted down the stairs, heart pounding, and rushed outside. They didn't speak until they reached the porch, gasping for air. "We have to call the police again," Jenna said, voice trembling. Mark nodded, dialing. When the officers arrived, they found the house empty, except for the 3 teenagers. They searched the property, but found no sign of Sam or any intruder. No footprints in the dirt, no disturbed foliage in the woods, no evidence anyone else had been there. Days passed. The police investigation turned up nothing. Mark couldn't sleep. Every night he felt the cold presence returning. Lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own, whispering voices just beyond hearing. One night he heard soft footsteps outside his bedroom window. Peering out, he saw a shadowy figure standing beneath the tree line, watching. Mark never saw Sam again. Years later, the house was torn down. Neighbors said the land was cursed, that the woman in the upstairs window was the ghost of a young girl who had vanished there decades ago, never found. Mark and his friends moved away, but the memory of that night lingered like a scar. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, Mark still hears her voice whisper in his ear, "You shouldn't have come back." Story, the end. The after-party started as most do, with that familiar, relaxed buzz lingering after the main event has died down. It was late, around 2 a.m., when the last few guests filtered out from Marcus's loft in the old industrial part of town. The main party had been wild, loud music, dancing, cheap beer. But as things quieted, a smaller group decided to stay behind. 6 of us, mostly close friends and a couple of acquaintances, gathered in the sprawling living room that was dimly lit by a few strings of fairy lights and the occasional flicker of a dying candle. Marcus's loft wasn't exactly new. It was in an old converted warehouse. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, dusty wooden beams. The place had character, but it also carried a subtle chill that even the warm glow of the lights couldn't chase away. None of us thought much about it at the time. We'd all been there before, some even living in similar old buildings. The atmosphere was cozy, almost intimate after the chaos of the party. As the night wore on, the group dwindled further. People wandered off to crash on couches or folded up mattresses on the floor. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the window. The cool glass fogged slightly from the warm room inside. A few people were talking quietly in the corner, but mostly there was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from tiredness and a shared feeling that the night is winding down. Marcus was talking to Claire, a girl I barely knew, about some new DJ he wanted to bring into the next party. I wasn't really paying attention when suddenly the lights flickered. It was a subtle thing, just a brief dimming and then a return to normal, but it made me look up. The air seemed to shift, the quiet chatter paused. Marcus frowned, reaching up to touch the switchboard on the wall. "Probably just a glitch," he said, but there was a tightness in his voice I hadn't heard before. Then, from the corner of the room, I caught something move out of the corner of my eye. A shadow that didn't belong to any of us, slipping just beyond the edge of the candlelight. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did anyone else see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded slowly. "Yeah. I thought it was just me. Probably just the flickering lights playing tricks," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. We settled back into our spots, but the unease lingered. About 15 minutes later, we heard it. A faint thudding, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing in the hallway outside the loft's main door. None of us expected anyone to be out there. The building was mostly empty at this hour. Marcus got up and peeked out the door. The hallway was dark and empty. "No one there," he said, but then the door creaked, just slightly, as if someone had nudged it. We exchanged uneasy glances. "It's probably just the old building settling," Marcus added, but his words rang hollow. Minutes passed and the footsteps continued, circling just outside our door, sometimes soft, sometimes louder, like someone pacing back and forth right beyond the threshold. It was impossible to ignore. We listened as the sound repeated, each step echoing hollowly against the concrete walls. Claire pulled her sweater tighter around her. This place always freaks me out at night. I think we're all just tired, I tried to joke, but my voice cracked. Then the power went out completely. The room was swallowed in darkness so sudden it felt like the air was sucked out too. We all froze. "Marcus?" Claire called softly. Nothing. A cold draft swept through the room. The faint scent of something like old perfume or flowers filled the air, but it wasn't a comforting smell. It was heavy, thick, clinging to our skin. From the darkness came a whisper, soft, almost unintelligible at first, but it grew louder. It wasn't words, not really, but a hissing, sighing sound that wrapped around us like smoke. It seemed to come from every direction, but especially the hallway. Marcus fumbled for his phone to turn on the flashlight. When he finally got the screen lit, the beam swept the hallway. Nothing. But then, just at the edge of the light, we saw her, a figure, pale and thin, standing at the far end of the hall. Her dress was tattered, hanging loosely like she had just climbed out of water. Long, dark hair hung over her face, dripping wet, though there was no water anywhere nearby. Her eyes, empty black holes, locked onto ours. The whispering stopped. We were frozen. Claire gasped. Suddenly the door slammed shut with a force that shook the entire loft. Marcus tried the handle. Locked from the inside. "I swear I didn't lock it," he said, panic rising in his voice. The figure started to move toward us, gliding, her feet never touching the floor. As she approached, the air turned icy cold and a feeling of overwhelming dread filled the room. I could feel something brush past me, a cold touch on my arm, like a warning. The others screamed and scrambled toward the back door, but it was sealed tight. The windows, too, were barred, a legacy of the building's industrial past. The woman reached out her hand, her fingers stretched impossibly long, pale and translucent. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. The power came back on. We were left staring at the empty hallway, the only evidence that anything had happened, the faint smell of damp and something metallic in the air. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then Claire whispered, "We need to get out of here." One by one, we filed out, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fear. Marcus never stayed in that loft again. Weeks later, I looked up the history of the building. It had once been a factory, and years ago, a young woman who worked there had drowned in the basement during a flood. Her body was never recovered. I still get chills thinking about that night. The feeling that we weren't just scared by some shadow or creaking floorboards, but by something trapped, desperate, still searching. The after-party was over, but the haunting was just beginning. Story the end. The music had long stopped, but the bass still throbbed in my head. It was almost 3 a.m., and the air in the house was thick with the scent of spilt beer, weed, and the residual heat of too many bodies packed in one space. I was leaning against the kitchen counter, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to decide whether it was worth the risk of driving home or just crashing on the living room floor. "Hey," Lena said, walking in with her heels in hand, mascara smudged slightly under her eyes. "You staying over?" "I might. I feel like my head's going to split if I move too fast," I replied. "You?" She shrugged. "Probably. Don't feel like calling an Uber this late, and this place is too big to be empty anyway." The house belonged to this guy named Marcus, an old friend of a friend who'd moved into his late uncle's mansion just a few months earlier. He was cool in that semi-creepy way, always trying to host the biggest parties, always telling stories about how weird the place was. Stuff like shadows moving in empty rooms, voices in the attic, and doors that unlocked themselves. No one took him seriously, of course. It just made his parties feel more edgy. When I first walked in that night, I thought the house had this strange stillness beneath the noise, like everything was painted on top of silence, the kind that felt thick, almost deliberate. But again, I chalked it up to booze and a long week. Lena and I wandered back into the living room where only a handful of people remained. 2 guys asleep on the floor, 1 girl passed out on a recliner, and Marcus, who was sitting on the staircase with a lit cigarette, staring at nothing in particular. "You good, man?" I asked. He looked up slowly, then smirked. "Yeah, house gets weird after midnight." Lena rolled her eyes. You and your ghost stories. Tell me, what is it this time? The walls whispering your name. Marcus leaned forward. Nah, just that weird feeling. Like someone's behind you, but when you turn, it's just the house again. He blew out smoke. Stay if you want. Just don't go upstairs. Lena laughed. Oh my God, seriously? I'm serious, he said. There's something wrong up there. We both looked at him for a beat, waiting for the punchline. It never came. I didn't plan to go upstairs anyway. I figured I'd crash on the couch, wake up to sunlight, regret everything I drank, and Uber home. But something about how he said it, calm and flat, made the hair on my arms stand. Around 3:30, Lena and I grabbed blankets from a linen closet and camped out in the den off the kitchen. The party had officially died. I could hear someone vomiting in the guest bathroom and the low hum of a distant TV that no one had turned off. I was too tired to think, drifting toward unconsciousness when I heard it. Footsteps. Not downstairs. Upstairs. They were slow. Unmistakably heavy, like boots on wood. A few steps, then silence, then more steps. I opened my eyes expecting Lena to have heard it too, but she was already asleep, breathing slowly beside me. I stared at the ceiling. The steps went on for a minute, maybe two, stopping and starting. Then I heard the unmistakable creak of a door opening. I sat up. It could have been anyone. Someone who decided to sleep in one of the upstairs rooms. But Marcus had said not to go up there. Maybe he was just trying to freak people out. Maybe someone ignored him. But something felt off. The air had that same charged quality I noticed earlier. Like walking into a room where someone had just been arguing. I grabbed my phone, used the flashlight, and tiptoed out into the hallway. The rest of the house was dark. I could see Marcus asleep on the stairs now, head resting on the railing, cigarette long since burned out. I moved to the bottom of the staircase and listened. Nothing. Then, very clearly, 3 loud knocks. Not at the front door, not at any door I could see. It came from inside the house, from upstairs. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. I waited, thinking someone would react. No one did. Everyone else was either passed out or didn't hear it. I started climbing the stairs before I could talk myself out of it. Each step groaned under my weight. At the top, the hallway was darker than I expected. The overhead light wasn't on. The only illumination came from a cracked door at the end, spilling a narrow shaft of pale yellow onto the wooden floor. I didn't remember anyone going up there. I moved forward slowly, the boards creaking beneath me. As I neared the door, it began to open wider on its own, just a few inches. I stood still, not breathing, staring at the sliver of light. There was no sound now, just the faint hum of something electric, maybe an old ceiling fan or a fridge. Then I saw it. A figure stepped into the light. A silhouette, broad shoulders, tall frame, no features I could make out. It didn't move toward me, just stood there. I whispered, "Hello?" It didn't answer. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster, until I was nearly running back down the stairs. I didn't stop until I was in the den again, heart racing, hands shaking. Lena stirred awake and looked at me. "You okay?" I sat on the edge of the blanket, trying to calm down. "Someone's upstairs." She rubbed her eyes. "So?" I mean, someone who shouldn't be. That got her attention. She sat up fully, like a stranger. I don't know. Maybe. I didn't want to say ghost. It felt stupid to say it out loud. We decided to wake Marcus. I shook his shoulder until he blinked himself awake. "There's someone upstairs," I told him. He looked at me like he already knew. "Yeah," he said. "It happens sometimes." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" I didn't want to say too much, man, but my uncle, he died up there. Fell down the stairs, broke his neck. I didn't even know he owned the place until I inherited it. But after I moved in, weird shit started happening. I've seen people, heard stuff, doors opening, things going missing. One night I saw someone sitting at the edge of my bed. I moved into the downstairs bedroom the next day. Lena was behind me, wide-eyed now. "You're joking." "I wish," he said. "It's like there's something in that room, like it waits. I don't think it likes parties." We were silent for a long time. Eventually, Marcus got up and locked the door to the staircase. We all stayed downstairs the rest of the night, huddled in the den with the TV playing quietly in the background. I must have drifted off around 5 a.m., but my sleep was broken. I kept waking up, feeling like someone was watching. Once, I thought I heard whispering in my ear, but no one was close enough. When sunlight finally poured through the windows, I felt a wave of relief, like something oppressive had lifted. We gathered our stuff and left quietly. Marcus didn't say much, just waved us off with a look that told me he was used to it. Lena and I didn't talk about it again for a few weeks. Then one night, we met up for drinks, and the memory resurfaced. I told her I kept dreaming about that figure in the light, waking up every night at 3 a.m. She said she sometimes felt like she was being watched in her apartment. We agreed not to go back to Marcus's house. A month later, I got a call from one of our mutual friends. Marcus had moved out, left in the middle of the night, said he couldn't take it anymore, claimed the thing upstairs followed him into his dreams, said it talked to him now. No one's heard from him since. The house sits empty, for sale but no buyers. People say it's haunted. Neighbors say lights flicker on at night. A shadow moves in the upstairs window. I drove by it once just to see. The curtains upstairs were open, and someone was standing there watching me. Story the end. I used to throw parties a lot during college. It wasn't anything extravagant, just house parties with some beer, cheap snacks, a Bluetooth speaker, and the usual rotating crowd of classmates and friends of friends. Our house was near campus, old and creaky but spacious, which made it ideal for hosting. The wood floors had seen better days, and the pipes moaned sometimes in the walls, but that just became part of its charm, especially when everyone was drunk. This story happened during the fall semester of senior year, a weekend in late October. The air had that crisp bite to it, and Halloween decorations littered our street. It wasn't a Halloween party exactly, more of a general Friday night blowout. My roommates, Jordan and Lacey, and I had invited about 30 people. The party was packed. Someone brought strobe lights, the music got louder as the night wore on, and eventually the living room floor felt like it might give way under everyone's dancing. By 2:30 a.m., most people had either left or crashed somewhere in the house. Lacey had gone to bed around 1, and Jordan was in the kitchen cleaning up the broken glass from a shattered bottle of vodka. I was leaning against the wall in the hallway, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a girl standing at the foot of the stairs. She was facing the wall, her back to me, her hair long and wet-looking. It caught me off guard because I didn't remember her being at the party. Her clothes were damp too, like she'd been caught in the rain, and her hands hung limply at her sides. My first thought was maybe she was too drunk or had passed out standing up. I stepped forward and asked, "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't answer. She didn't move at all. I glanced back toward the kitchen, thinking maybe Jordan could help, but when I looked back toward the stairs, she was gone. I walked quickly to the foot of the stairs and looked up. Nothing. Quiet. I checked the bathroom on the first floor, empty. I even knocked on the door to Lacey's room, but she shouted through it, irritated. "What? No one came up here?" I asked. "No," she said, already annoyed. "Leave me alone. I'm sleeping." I went back down to the kitchen, now rattled. Jordan was sweeping broken glass into a dustpan. "You good?" he asked when he saw my face. "Did you see a girl? Wet hair, weird posture, didn't say anything?" He stopped sweeping. "What, just now?" I nodded. "No, man. What kind of girl?" I described her again. Jordan frowned. "I don't remember anyone like that at the party." It stuck with me, even though I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired or tipsy and imagined her. Still, I barely slept that night. The next morning, I got up around 10 a.m. and started picking up the mess. Lacey emerged a little after, dragging a trash bag, and we worked in silence for a bit. Then she said, "Hey, were you playing a prank last night?" I looked up. "What kind of prank?" She hesitated. "I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of my room, like just watching." "A woman." She didn't say anything. I turned on the light and she was gone. We both froze. She was dripping wet, Lacey said, her voice quieter now. I thought maybe I was dreaming. But the carpet was wet where she stood. My skin went cold. Later that day, Jordan admitted that when he was taking the trash out around 3 a.m., he thought he saw someone standing behind our shed. Just standing. He assumed it was a neighbor and ignored it. But now, it didn't feel like coincidence. That weekend, we tried to put it behind us, but things started happening in the house. Not overtly terrifying at first. Footsteps at night when no one was walking. Doors creaking open when we knew we'd closed them. The floorboards creaked at odd times, like someone was walking from room to room. We blamed it on the old house, the wind, whatever we could think of. But by Tuesday night, things escalated. I woke up to the sound of running water. At first, I thought someone was showering, but the noise was coming from downstairs. I went down and found the kitchen sink turned on full blast. The floor was soaked. I shut it off and checked the back door. It was locked. When I turned around, I caught a glimpse of someone standing by the refrigerator. But by the time I flipped the light on, no one was there. The next morning, the three of us sat down and finally talked seriously about what was happening. We all felt it. The sense of being watched, the brief glimpses of someone in the hallway mirrors the wet footprints that appeared in the hallway. They'd start in the middle of the floor and vanish a few steps later. Lacey showed me a picture she'd taken in the mirror above her dresser. In the reflection behind her, there was a pale woman standing in the corner of the room. Her face was blurry, her mouth open, like she was screaming. We decided to research the house. It was built in the 1920s, and we found out through public records that in the 70s, a woman named Ellen Morgan had lived there. She'd gone missing in 1978. Her body was never found, but police suspected foul play because of blood found in the basement. Her husband said she'd run off with someone, but that never added up. We had never been in the basement. The door was usually locked with an old chain and padlock, but curiosity got the better of us. Jordan took a bolt cutter to the lock. The stairs were steep and narrow, the air down there damp and cold. The basement floor was dirt, and in one corner we found an old clawfoot tub. It was filled with stagnant black water. The walls were crumbling stone, and one section looked darker than the rest, like the earth had been disturbed. We left it alone and went back upstairs, all of us shaken. That night, everything got worse. Around 2 a.m., I was woken by the sound of sobbing. It was coming from the hallway. I opened my door and saw a trail of wet footprints leading toward the stairs. The sobbing got louder. Then I heard Lacey scream. I ran to her room. She was sitting upright in bed, pointing at the closet. "She came out of there," she said, her voice shaking. "She crawled out of there and stared at me. Her eyes were gone." Jordan ran in too, breathless. "I just saw her in the hallway. I swear to God, she looked right at me." We all slept in the living room that night, the lights on. The sobbing continued on and off for hours. At one point, something knocked on the inside of the basement door. 3 distinct, deliberate knocks. The next day, we called a local historian who specialized in old homes and hauntings. He came by reluctantly after hearing our story. His name was Mark, an older man with a thin frame and skeptical eyes. He said he dealt with a few houses like ours over the years. Mark explored the basement and didn't come back up for a long time. When he did, he looked pale. "There's a body under there," he said, shaking. "I'm almost sure of it. That tub? That's not just some antique. It was used to contain something, maybe to hide blood. And that soft patch of dirt? That's where she is." We called the police. They brought in a forensic team. They found human remains under the floor, wrapped in a tattered bedsheet. DNA testing later confirmed it was Ellen Morgan. After they removed the remains, the activity in the house changed. But it didn't stop. It just got darker. Now, instead of fleeting glimpses, we'd wake up to find her standing at the foot of our beds. The dripping water continued, but it now had a thick, iron-like smell to it. We'd find clumps of wet black hair in the sinks and the tub upstairs. Our electronics started malfunctioning. Phones dying instantly when taking photos in the mirror. Lights flickering only in the rooms where we were alone. Lacey left the house first. She moved in with her cousin and didn't come back. Jordan followed a week later after waking up with deep scratches down his chest. That left me alone. I stayed because I didn't want to be afraid of her. I thought maybe she just needed closure. One night, I sat in the basement by the now empty tub. I left a candle burning and said her name aloud. "Ellen Morgan. You're not forgotten. You don't have to stay here anymore." There was silence at first. Then, behind me, a cold gust of air rushed past. The candle went out. I turned and saw nothing, but I could feel her there. That night was the first night I slept peacefully. No footsteps, no crying, just silence. For a few weeks, everything was calm. I even thought maybe she'd moved on, until one night about a month later, I came home late after visiting friends. As I was unlocking the front door, I saw something in the reflection of the glass. She was behind me, closer than ever before, eyes still gone, mouth open. She moved when I moved. I haven't gone back to that house since. It's been rented to new tenants now, a group of younger students. I've driven past it a few times, and once, I swear, I saw a dark figure in the upstairs window, the window to my old room. Sometimes when it rains, I dream of the house, the basement tub, the black water, and her crawling slowly from the shadows, always watching. Story the end. The summer night was thick and heavy, the kind of heat that makes the air hang still and every shadow feel like it's watching. It was the last weekend before the new school year started, and for a group of friends from a small town in Ohio, that meant one thing: one last big party before everything changed. They'd found the perfect spot for it, an old house on the edge of town, about a mile down a dirt road that wound through dense woods. The place was known locally as the Hartwell House. Abandoned for nearly a decade, it had a reputation that hovered somewhere between haunted and creepy old wreck. No one had lived there since Old Man Hartwell died in the late 90s, and the town's teenagers told stories about strange noises, cold spots, and even ghostly figures seen in the windows after dark. Despite the warnings, or maybe because of them, the group was determined to have their after party there. It was the perfect combination of secluded and spooky. Jake, the unofficial leader of the group, had grown up hearing those stories. He wasn't superstitious, but the mystery made the place more exciting. They arrived around 9 that Saturday night. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house looked even more imposing in the fading light. Peeling paint, broken shutters, a sagging porch that creaked with every step. The air smelled of damp wood and wild grass. A faint mist curled around the trees. The group of about 15 friends carried in speakers, coolers, and snacks. They strung up fairy lights around the porch and in the front yard, casting an eerie glow. Someone had brought a fog machine, which filled the air with thick, rolling clouds. The atmosphere was surreal. The party was alive with energy and anticipation. As the music started and the first drinks were passed around, laughter echoed through the empty rooms. The old house seemed to absorb the noise, amplifying it somehow. Everyone was relaxed, joking, dancing. Jake noticed that the usual nervousness about the house's reputation was fading. The place felt less like a haunted relic and more like their private club for the night. After a while, people began exploring the house, poking around the creaky rooms, daring each other to find the haunted spots they'd heard about. The old staircase groaned underfoot. Some claimed to feel cold drafts in the hallways, but everyone laughed it off as the wind sneaking through broken windows. Jake was hanging out on the porch with his close friend Mandy and her boyfriend Ryan. They watched the crowd, the fire pit burning brightly nearby, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. The woods behind the house were thick and black, a dark wall swallowing any light that tried to creep in. Around midnight, the party was in full swing. The music was louder, the crowd wilder. Some kids were already pretty drunk, others just buzzing on adrenaline. Jake decided to check on his little sister, Ellie, who had come with a few of her friends but wasn't drinking. He found her near the back of the house, standing by the edge of the woods, staring into the dark trees. Her face was pale, and she looked tense. "Hey, everything okay?" Jake asked. Ellie jumped slightly, then smiled weakly. "Yeah, just weird out here." "Come back to the fire," Jake said, taking her hand. As they walked back, Ellie stopped and pointed toward the tree line. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Jake squinted but saw nothing except the blackness of the forest. "Probably just an animal," he said. But Ellie shook her head. No, it was something or someone. Later, as the party started to wind down, Jake noticed Mandy had disappeared. He asked Ryan if he'd seen her, but Ryan shrugged, saying she might be inside or stepping out for some air. Jake's gut told him to look for her. He went inside, calling her name as he moved through the darkened rooms. The air was cooler inside, musty. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of his vision. He reached the basement door, a heavy slab of wood with rusty hinges, partly open. Curious, he shone his phone flashlight down the stairs. The basement was cold and damp, filled with broken furniture and old boxes covered in dust. At the far end, Jake thought he saw movement, a flicker of a figure. "Mandy?" he called softly. No answer. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. His heart jumped as he lunged toward the stairs. The light from his phone flickered and went out. The basement plunged into darkness. Jake's breath came fast, his hands searching for the stairs. Then a whisper echoed, "Leave." Frozen, Jake tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. After what felt like minutes, the door creaked open slowly, and Jake scrambled out. He ran upstairs, but Mandy was nowhere to be found. Outside, the party was over, people gone or gathered near their cars. Jake told his friends what had happened. Some joked that he'd been spooked by the place. Others were uneasy. The next morning, Jake went back to the house alone. The sun was bright, but the house looked empty and silent. The backyard was littered with trash and trampled grass. As Jake wandered around, he found something near the woods, a torn piece of Mandy's shirt snagged on a branch. His stomach turned. He called out her name, but only the wind answered. Days passed, and Mandy was still missing. The police searched, but there were no clues. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the house held secrets it didn't want revealed. One night, he got a call from Ellie. "I saw her," she whispered. "Where?" Jake asked, heart pounding. "At the edge of the woods near the house. She looked different, like she was trying to tell me something." Jake went back, standing at the tree line. The night was cold, the stars obscured by clouds. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared between the trees. It was Mandy, pale and translucent, eyes hollow but somehow pleading. Jake froze. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then she faded into the darkness. Jake stumbled back, heart racing. The town never forgot the Hartwell House party. Mandy's disappearance became one more chapter in the house's haunted history. Jake never returned, and every time he hears a whisper on a quiet night, he wonders if the house is still calling. Story the end. It was around 3:15 a.m. when I finally decided to call it a night. The party had mostly wound down, the music was off, and the living room still carried the stale tang of spilled beer and warm sweat. I'd been at a friend of a friend's house somewhere deep in a wooded stretch outside of town, not far enough to be rural, but isolated enough to feel like it. The kind of place where GPS signal flickered and the street lamps ended half a mile from the driveway. I wasn't originally planning to stay, but after a couple of drinks and some harmless flirtation with a girl named Casey, it just felt easier to crash on the couch instead of calling a ride. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us left, me, Casey, her friend Jules, 2 guys named Rob and Thomas, and the host Ethan. Most everyone else had cleared out by 2 a.m., the partiers gradually disappearing into ride shares or making long walks to their cars down the gravel driveway. By 3:30, the conversations had turned sluggish, mostly murmurs and soft laughter. I curled up on the left side of the L-shaped couch with a hoodie rolled under my head. Casey was in the middle cushion with a blanket tossed over her, scrolling through her phone. The glow from it was the only light left in the room, aside from the faint amber haze from the kitchen nightlight. Jules was lying on a beanbag near the fireplace, already out cold. Ethan had disappeared upstairs about an hour earlier, and Rob and Thomas were still in the kitchen, talking low and fast about someone who had stolen weed from their stash. I closed my eyes and listened to the soft hiss of the fridge, the occasional thump of someone moving upstairs, and the low murmur of wind outside. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then silence again. I drifted into sleep, or what I thought was sleep. That's when it started. I don't know what woke me first. Maybe it was a coldness, or maybe just a weird stillness in the room. You know how sometimes when you wake up in the middle of the night and everything just feels off? The air was heavier somehow. I sat up a little and rubbed my eyes. Casey's phone was no longer glowing. The kitchen light was out, and the room was utterly, completely silent. I figured maybe the power had gone out, but then I noticed something strange. The silence wasn't normal silence. It was the kind that rang in your ears, like the world itself was holding its breath. The kind of silence that made your heartbeat feel too loud. Then I noticed Jules wasn't on the beanbag anymore. I scanned the room, still lying down, blinking through the darkness. The moonlight coming through the windows wasn't strong, just enough to sketch the faintest shapes. The couch, the table, the curtain drawn half open, but no sign of Jules. I leaned forward and whispered, "Casey?" She didn't respond. "Casey," I said again, louder. Still nothing. I nudged her shoulder. Her body was stiff, like she was tensed up under the blanket. Her eyes were open but unfocused, wide and glassy. Her breathing was shallow, barely there. I reached for my phone to shine a light, but it wasn't where I'd left it. It should have been in my hoodie pocket. I stood up slowly, trying not to panic. My legs felt weak, like I'd been sitting for hours longer than I thought. I walked to the kitchen, hoping to find one of the guys still awake, or maybe Ethan, but the kitchen was dark and empty. I whispered, "Rob? Thomas?" Nothing. Then, faintly, I heard a sound from upstairs, a soft creak. Then another. Footsteps. Deliberate. Measured. Not like someone walking to the bathroom, but like someone pacing. I hesitated in the kitchen entryway, glancing back toward the living room light where Casey hadn't moved at all. Something was wrong. Really wrong. I took a few steps toward the stairs. I had no idea why. Maybe part of me thought Jules had wandered up there, maybe drunk and disoriented. But the closer I got, the colder the air became. Physically cold, like walking into a freezer. As I reached the base of the stairs, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't from upstairs. It was behind me. I turned around fast, heart jumping, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone duck behind the corner of the hallway that led to the back of the house. But there had been no footsteps, no movement sound, just the whisper and that fast, shadow-like dart out of my view. I backed away from the stairs and turned toward the hall. "Hello," I called, my voice cracking. Still nothing, and then an unmistakable sound. The door to the basement creaked open. I had no intention of checking the basement. Absolutely not. I turned around and went back to the living room. Casey was sitting up now. The blanket slipped off her shoulders, her phone still off. She looked at me slowly. "I think something's wrong," I said. She didn't respond for a second. Then she whispered, "Don't go to the basement." I froze. "I didn't tell you I was going to," I said slowly. She blinked once. "I saw it. In a dream. You went down there." "What?" "You went down there. And you didn't come back up." That was enough. I reached over and grabbed the throw blanket, wrapping it around her. "Come on. We're getting out of here." We started moving toward the front door. The moonlight through the front windows was stronger now. I could see the hallway clearly, except there was someone standing at the end of it. Jules. Or at least someone who looked like Jules. She stood unnaturally straight, her arms stiff at her sides, head tilted slightly, her mouth just barely open. And her eyes, they were black. Not shadowed, but fully black, like pits dug into her face. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at us. I stepped in front of Casey instinctively. "Jules?" She didn't respond. And then the lights flickered back on, and she was gone. The hallway was empty. Casey whimpered softly behind me, holding the blanket close. "We need to go." We reached the door, and I turned the knob, but it wouldn't open. I twisted harder. Nothing, like it was locked from the outside. We tried the windows, every single one stuck, unmoving. Even the sliding door in the kitchen felt like it was welded shut. That's when we heard the others, shouts from upstairs. Thomas's voice, "What the hell is happening?" Rob, panicked. "She's not breathing. I swear to God, she was just talking." I turned to Casey. "Stay here." She grabbed my arm. "Don't leave me." So we both went up. The second floor was colder, darker. We found them in the master bedroom. Ethan was lying on the bed, like face pale, eyes open but unseeing. Rob was pacing in a panic, and Thomas was crying. "He just stopped," Thomas said, gasping. He was talking about someone outside the window, then he just froze. Casey pointed to the window. I walked over to it slowly and looked out. In the backyard, just beyond the tree line, I saw them. 4 figures, all standing perfectly still, facing the house. No features, just silhouettes. And then, slowly, they began to raise their arms, not waving, just lifting them, like pointing, at us. I stumbled back. "We have to leave, now." Rob and Thomas didn't argue. We rushed downstairs, every nerve in my body screaming. But when we got to the front door again, it was wide open, no wind, just silence, a hallway of darkness waiting beyond. We stepped outside, and the instant we crossed the threshold, it was like something broke. The cold lifted. The air changed. We ran down the driveway, all 5 of us, not speaking, not looking back until we reached the edge of the property. When we did look back, the house was dark again, completely black, except one window on the second floor. The master bedroom. A figure stood in it, watching us. We never spoke of it again. Not really. Ethan was declared dead of a heart arrhythmia. Jules was never found, her car still in the driveway, her phone on the beanbag where she'd been sleeping. The police chalked it up to a disappearance. Her family put up posters. But we knew. Something had been in that house, waiting for the right time. Maybe it had been tied to someone who left. Maybe it latched onto the party. I don't know, but it watched, and when everyone else left, it finally made its move. Sometimes I wonder if it followed any of us home. I haven't seen Casey since. She blocked me on everything a few days later. Sometimes I think I hear whispers at night, especially around 3:15 a.m. Story the end.